Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to be beating Elden Ring's DLC and all of its Remembrance bosses at level 1 with no Scadutree fragments, and critiquing and reviewing each one of them to determine if they're better or worse at level 1, which I'll showcase on this very nice tier list here. Some of you already know who this tier is for. The rules for this challenge are very simple, just don't do one of these. This means my red bar is very small and my damage numbers are even smaller. This extends the length of each fight and massively reduces the margin for error, putting both your skill and the design of the game under extreme scrutiny, as you're forced to properly learn each boss, understand their moveset, and deal with every attack. This makes those awkward, poorly telegraphed, annoying, or just straight up unfair attacks really obvious, making it a lot easier to properly assess the quality of each fight. This video has been a very long time in the making, as I started taking notes and working on it literally on the day the DLC released, which was almost a year ago now. So I'm super happy to have finally finished and continue this long-running series on my channel. So here are all my thoughts after hundreds and hundreds of hours of the Elden Ring DLC at level 1. For most people, this is the first boss they'll encounter in the DLC, and I would say as a whole it's a pretty good introduction. Although unlike most bosses where the barrier to properly understanding their moveset is the fact that you do too much damage and are allowed to make too many mistakes, things that are largely addressed by being at level 1, with Dancing Lion there's another much bigger barrier, and that is the lock-on system. To really get the most out of this boss, you have to stay locked off the whole time, as many of its attacks can only be dodged and punished effectively if you can position very precisely, something that's extremely difficult to do when the camera's attached to the writhing mass that is Dancing Lion. I think the immediate response to that is to be repulsed that a boss would be designed in a way that punishes you for using a mechanic as core as locking on, but I would say that the lock-on can be very restrictive, especially when it comes to challenging the player to position precisely, and while obviously making a boss's complexity largely inaccessible for a huge portion of the player base is not great, I'd rather that than FromSoft leave good boss ideas on the table because it conflicts with the lock-on system. But I think what sways me the most on this issue is just how well Dancing Lion works when you do stay locked off the whole time. This is one of the most satisfying fights they have ever made. So much of this moveset is strafable, the hitboxes on almost every attack are near perfect, and you're rewarded with massive punish windows for finding a way to weave around every attack, making the difficulty of execution feel worthwhile. With that being said, there are definitely some major slip-ups, first of which is the lightning phase. I actually don't have as much of an issue with this as you might expect. The lightning strikes on each attack are actually deterministic, meaning you can learn where they are on each attack and dodge them with 100% consistency every single time. My issue is that learning the lightning patterns is so incredibly awkward and painful, and if you're staying locked on is essentially impossible. There's just too much happening on screen, and what is and isn't being hit by lightning is too unclear for this to be reasonably figured out, which forces you into this trial and error playstyle that basically just feels like shit. I'm all for testing the player's ability to position as precisely as possible, but I think the challenge laid out before you should be clear, not indecipherable. Expectedly, it's this phase that makes the learning process at level 1 especially hellish, as the lightning strikes one-shot you. But that isn't even my biggest personal problem with the lightning phase. The thing I hate the most, by far, is the breath attack, because it's genuinely just broken. In every other phase and form, to dodge this attack you can just run to the side, but for some reason, in lightning phase and lightning phase only, it tracks far better than in the other phases, meaning you have to either be a good distance away from the boss, react almost instantly, or do this very awkward dodge where you run into the side of the lion as it turns away from you. This fucking sucks and feels terrible to play against, because your options are getting very far away and slow the fight to a crawl, or keep fighting like intended and deal with the fact that there's a 5% chance you just get nuked randomly. I dislike this so much more than the lightning strikes because it feels largely out of your control whether you live or die, because even with lots of practice, the reaction speed required to dodge the attack means you'll die a lot of the time anyway. At least this attack is quite rare at close range. With that all being said, I still think this boss is very good, and the vast majority of the time it's all satisfying dodges, large punishes, and fair attacks. Even at level 1, where the rough edges are that much more noticeable, I still had a good time with this boss, although it probably helps that it's really weak to fire damage, meaning the Starfist with Flaming Strike were hitting really hard. Overall, I would say this boss is slightly improved at level 1, although I do have lots of experience claw gripping, so the transition to being fully locked off wasn't an issue. So I'm just gonna say your experience may vary depending on how used to locked off combat fat you are. Rellana is for most people the second boss that you encounter, as skipping her requires pretty intentionally avoiding the massive castle that stands in front of you, so to stick with the intended path as much as possible, I decided to fight her next. This is a pretty sizable increase in difficulty and complexity from the first boss, which is saying something because Dancing Lion is already pretty difficult. Rellana boasts an enormous moveset which she can combo together into varied attack strings, reacting to your positioning and mixing you up. She's a deeply complex boss, and much of that complexity stems from how she can string most of her moves together to adapt to what you're doing as the player. The fact that she's so attentive to your behavior though can also be turned around on her and used to manipulate her attack patterns even further, forcing her to give you the specific attacks that you want. This is a very satisfying and rewarding process that keeps the boss engaging for hours upon hours, as there's always a way to optimize the fight further. This is predictably especially noticeable at level 1 when you're forced to fight her for hours and hours anyway. Unlike Dancing Lion though, this boss also feels pretty great to learn. Despite the at times cryptic complexity of the fight, I was at no point forced into a trial and error playstyle like I was with the Lion. I was able to figure out how to respond to each of her attacks by just watching closely and theorizing about what was causing each follow-up. Oh, the thing in her hand does damage to me when she hits me with it, allowing me to eventually be able to predict what was coming next. This created really great aha moments where I'd figured out how to deal with certain problematic attacks. Specifically, I remember realizing for the first time that I should respond differently based on if she dodges to my left or to my right, backrolling if she dodges to my right, and rolling past her if she dodges left. This was significant as it didn't just avoid that one attack, but set me up to avoid the following combo. It marked a moment where I'd recognized that what was getting me hit wasn't just the literal attack that did the damage, but a mistake I was making earlier in the combo string that was giving me harder attacks and had placed me in a poor position. The learning process is also aided by the fact that this boss is just incredibly fun to fight. She has constant openings of varying sizes, incredible hitboxes allowing for several satisfying strafes, and has quite a lot of attacks that can be jumped, allowing for both a dodge and a punish at the same time. With all of that being said, this boss does have some issues, especially when you're fighting her at level 1. The first and most significant problem is her glint blade spam. Rellana loves to shoot glint blades at you. It's like her favorite thing to do alongside Messmer and not having a face. Anytime she's at range, she'll stall you out with glint blade spam, which really harms the pacing of the fight and often resets her poise meter, which is why I brought throwing knives with me. But as much as every fiber of my sweaty try-hard being wants to come down on this hard and call it a horrible design choice, I came to a realization about stalling attacks like these recently when I watched a new player play Elden Ring for the first time. For them, these attacks were a welcome pause in the action to collect themselves and heal up, which is something I really overlooked as somebody who plays these games a lot. Although with that being said, at level 1 you really don't need to pause as you aren't going to be healing anyway, so this is really just slowing down the learning process. The other issue I have with Rellana is her phase transition, which is just way too much free damage to be handing out. It's pretty much single-handedly the reason that I chose to do this run without Scadutree fragments, as you can easily skip phase 2 with blessing levels at level 1 with minimal buffs. Even without blessing levels at level 1 with no buffs, you still get to chunk a huge portion of her health during the phase transition, which kind of sucks, and I really wish this was just a cutscene instead. The one other tiny minuscule nitpick I have is that her longest combo string in phase 2 can get a little long. Generally, I think the complaint of they just don't stop attacking is a clear sign of somebody who just doesn't really know what they're doing, but this one combo does genuinely feel like you are standing there while she plays the game, waiting for your turn. Fortunately, this is extremely rare. Overall, I would say Rellana is slightly improved at level 1. Your damage here is so good that the fight isn't significantly longer than it was for most people on their first playthrough, but at the very least, you're forced to engage with some of the complexity of the fight to avoid getting hit until the phase transition, which is enough to make things a little more interesting than it would be with levels. Before I move on, there are a couple of important things I need to mention about this boss. First of all is that you really need to light roll for her, since certain attacks like her upward slash are incredibly awkward when you're mid-rolling. Also, if you want to fight Rellana but you don't want to run all the way through Castle Ensis, you can take the back route around to Shadow Altus and then do this little jump, landing right by the elevator before Rellana's boss room. It's really convenient. Beating Rellana marks the point where the DLC really opens up, meaning there isn't a major boss that the majority of players will encounter next, so I just went with what I thought was best. I took the long route around to the back entrance of Shadowkeep, skipping the garbage hippo boss, and ended up at Gaius' fog wall. Gaius is definitely one of the most polished fights in the DLC. He has very minimal issues, and they pale in comparison to everything that he does right. All of the fundamentals of great boss design are here. Excellent telegraphing and hitboxes on attacks, frequent punish windows that vary in size, a sizable and varied moveset, and a few key attacks that attempt to guide the player into the ideal way of fighting the boss. But despite all of this, Gaius doesn't manage to reach the highest echelon of boss for me, and that's for one reason: he just isn't complex enough. At first glance it seems really wrong that a boss that essentially does everything right can still be snubbed from the highest tier. I spent a long time trying to figure out exactly why I felt this way, so forgive me for going on a little tangent, but my best explanation is this. There's a concept in game theory called a solved game, and it refers to a game that's outcome can be correctly predicted from any position, assuming that both players play perfectly. Tic-tac-toe is a good example of this, as it's simple enough that it's solved by most people when they're kids, with every game ending in a draw. While Gaius is a very good boss, he lacks the depth and complexity of those above him. His moveset isn't small or samey though, it just doesn't have that endless capacity for optimization that bosses like Rellana and Malenia do, and that's essentially because he doesn't react to the player nearly as much. The moment-to-moment gratification you get from dodging his attacks is still very much present, but it lacks that extra layer, that wrinkle of depth that top-tier bosses gain by having a massive complex web of actions and reactions. In this way, Gaius is much like a solved game, or at least a partially solved one. That's not me saying that Gaius is the tic-tac-toe of Souls bosses, but he's maybe the Connect 4 to Malenia's chess. Within a reasonably short period of time, you can figure out what is essentially the optimal way to fight him. It probably won't be exactly perfect, but if you fought the boss for another 100 hours, it's likely you'd still be fighting him in a way that mostly resembled how you were after only a handful. Now let's compare this to a boss like Malenia. This is Ramonchi's 1 hour and 15 minute long barefist hitless Malenia fight. This is incredibly well optimized, so much so that it hardly even looks like how I fight Malenia, and I've no-hit her with every single weapon in the game and put at least 200 hours into just fighting this boss alone. And most importantly, this looks absolutely nothing like what high-level Malenia gameplay did at launch.
That's why he's the GOAT!
This is 2 years of development in understanding the most complex boss FromSoft have ever made, condensed into just over an hour of perfect gameplay. It's kind of beautiful, and I think it demonstrates my point about depth, complexity, and conditional follow-ups quite well, and why they matter to me so much. Anyway, back to Gaius. Despite glazing him for being basically perfect, there are some small issues that I have with the fight. First of all, and you all knew this was coming, his charge attack. It kind of sucks. This sort of falls under the umbrella of a larger criticism that I have for Gaius, which is that his ranged moveset as a whole kind of sucks. It's a lot of attacks that you can't punish, vague projectiles, and overly aggressive tracking. To an extent, this sort of feels intentional as a way to encourage the player to fight this boss up close where it's more engaging, and I think attacks like the drill charge he likes to spam at range to close the distance are good evidence for that. But I don't think it then makes sense to spawn the boss on the complete opposite side of the arena and script it to do the most frustrating of its moves every time you start the encounter. If you're looking for a good solution to this attack, there are a number that have been figured out, but the one that I like the most is getting on your horse and dashing away just before he hits you. It's pretty foolproof and has worked consistently for me for a while now. The only other small issue I have is that I don't think Phase 2 meaningfully expands his moveset. All he really gets is one attack that is mostly spectacle and some spikes on a few moves which you likely aren't gonna get hit by anyway. It's not such a big deal as his moveset already has enough meat on the bone to be enjoyable, but it would have been nice to see a little more. Overall, I think Gaius is significantly improved at level 1, which may seem a little out of the blue, but almost all of my appreciation for this boss comes from fighting him at level 1, since on my first playthrough I killed Gaius so fast and so easily by staggering him over and over that I basically got no feel for the fight, and I think that's probably an experience that a lot of people had. So even though our damage with the Starfist is unusually good for Gaius, I still feel as though I had a dramatically more interesting time with the boss at level 1 compared to a normal playthrough. While passing through the Shadowkeep Church area, I also grabbed the graces for Scadutree Avatar, so I thought I may as well fight it next. This boss does a very good job at demonstrating FromSoft's ability to develop a moveset over multiple boss phases. It shows how well they can escalate difficulty and change the challenge each attack presents, while still maintaining the DNA from a previous phase to smooth over the learning process. Scadutree Avatar has 3 phases, and Phase 2 seems like the baseline boss moveset that they started with. It has a number of close-range arm slams that spawn a cluster of thorns, forcing the player to dodge in the right direction as well as at the right time, a handful of ranged attacks that put pressure on the player and close the distance, and a very annoying dash attack. From here they branched out into Phase 1 and Phase 3, with Phase 1 trimming down the moveset, removing that extra positional challenge on the arm slams, and overall making the fight a lot simpler, and Phase 3 leaning into more gimmicky spectacle with these huge holy damage explosion attacks with a very long wind-up and large punish window. This works really well, and makes for a very dramatic boss fight, as well as an engaging learning experience. Phase 1 does a good job at helping you get to grips with the moveset, being able to recognize and differentiate between each of the attack animations without the worry of positioning exactly right just yet. This makes phase 2 that much more enjoyable, as you can clearly tell how these moves you're now familiar with have changed and can effectively reassess your strategy to accommodate for the greater challenge. And then phase 3 finishes the fight off with this huge scary looking explosion that actually makes this the easiest phase, since it provides such a large opening that you can most of the time kill the boss outright. Even at level 1, this boss was pretty much dead after the first attack because it's so weak to fire damage that our DPS is really solid. With that all being said, while I think the ideas behind this fight are very good, it is somewhat lacking in execution. The biggest offender is the impenetrable thorns attack that it uses at range. This thing is super jank. It tracks in a really weird way, has an odd and inconsistent hitbox, and often misses in such a way that you'll get hit while dodging with otherwise correct timing. It doesn't help that it really likes to open with this attack, and of course at level 1 this one-shots you. On top of this, Scadutree Avatar does have a tendency to stall quite a bit. The attacks like the holy projectile, retreating swipe, and especially the charge attack which is scripted at the start of phase 2 come to mind. These don't feel like they add a lot to the fight. I understand having maybe one of these to give the player a break occasionally, but with 3 it gets a little much. My last issue with this boss is that holy explosion attack in phase 3. As much as I think it fits well in the fight, the attack itself is straight up terrible. It has such a long wind-up that it essentially has zero telegraphing, meaning to dodge it at close range you're forced to memorize the timing, which takes us back to the dancing lion problem of trial and error. The non-painful way to deal with this attack is to get very far away where the explosion can't reach you and you only have to dodge the beams of light which you can react to. But then this attack has the same issue as the other stalling attacks. Basically, it feels bad. Overall though, I still think this fight is reasonably good, and I'd say for the most part is improved by being at level 1. Although if you chose not to take advantage of its insane fire damage weakness when fighting this boss normally, the experience is likely very similar. This is a very important moment in the playthrough. If you're planning on doing this run for yourself and you take one thing away from this video, it should be this. Make absolutely sure that you talk to Consort before going to fight Messmer so you can summon him at the end of the fight. This progresses his questline and removes him from the Leda gang in Enir Illim, making it considerably less painful. You don't actually have to fight Messmer with a summon for this, you can just run to the summon sign after killing Messmer and summon Consort in the brief window between the final hit and the demigod slain text. Messmer is the poster child for the DLC, and I think he fully lived up to that expectation. His moveset is excellently crafted, being well telegraphed and varied, and sets the player up well for those aha moments where you piece together how each of his combos work. He also does a good job at directing the player into fighting more aggressively, with these massive hitboxes that punish a passive playstyle. His spear hitbox is actually really large, so they wanted to make sure that you got the message that you should be rolling into him rather than away. He also has a good selection of more complicated and flashier moves that I think work really well, as they provide a spike in difficulty that keeps the fight engaging and rewards the player with massive punish windows for dodging successfully. My favourite of these is Messmer's Assault, which is probably the most cryptic attack in his moveset, but can be worked out by logically thinking through the problem and addressing each part of the attack separately, eventually making for a very satisfying dodge. But I think the most successful aspect of his design is how it balances readability and complexity, allowing the player to dodge the majority of his moveset on instinct by simply observing his animations closely and dodging with the correct timing, while also having complex enough combo strings to keep the fight interesting as you pour in dozens upon dozens of attempts. In this way, he feels very Dark Souls 3, as many of the bosses in that game seem to follow a similar design philosophy, one where a boss can be beaten by just having a very solid grasp on the core mechanics, but also has a lot more going on under the surface that you can choose to engage with. If you've seen my Is Dark Souls 3 Better at Level 1 video, which you should go watch if you haven't, it will come as no surprise that I absolutely love this way of designing bosses, as it creates some of the most enjoyable fights in the series. So I'm pleased to say that Messmer can join that list, as he's my favourite boss in the DLC. For me, he embodies that perfect middle ground between a more cryptic fight like Rellana and a simpler fight like Gaius. The fact that you can opt into the complexity of the fight, but still have some level of success while engaging with none of it, makes the early stages of the learning process a lot more enjoyable than it is with a boss like Rellana, and he does this without losing that capacity for optimization that you do with a boss like Gaius. I'm still learning new things about this boss, getting little extra hits in between his attacks, and changing how I fight him to force different moves, and he's by far my most fought boss in the DLC. And throughout this whole process, from my first attempt to my latest, it always felt like I was able to engage with the boss in a meaningful way. With that all being said, I do have some very minor issues with this boss, first of which is this attack, his repositioning double swipe. This is what is generally referred to as a frame trap, essentially two hitboxes spaced in such a way that to dodge the second second one, you have to have dodged the first one sufficiently early. Take this clip for example, where I've entered invincibility frames during my roll on the same frame that the hitbox of his first swing is active. This avoids the first swing, but puts me all the way on his right side where the second swing starts, and because I rolled so late, by the time the hitbox for swing 2 is active, I'm still in the recovery animation from my roll. So before I can roll again, I'm immediately hit by swing 2 of the attack. For this to occur, you need to have both rolled very late on the first swing and ended up on his right side for the second, which seems like a really unlikely scenario, but actually happens a lot more than you'd expect, as a lot of Messmer's attacks are dodged by rolling towards his right side. On top of this, his double swipe comes out really fast, is used pretty often, and is unpunishable, making it especially annoying to deal with. This also means that if he spams this move over and over, which he sometimes likes to do, it stalls out the fight and resets his poise, which feels terrible. This would have a much more notable impact on the fight, but fortunately by standing behind him or at a little distance away, you can massively reduce the frequency that he uses it. Also, he almost never uses it in phase 2, so overall it isn't that much of a problem. The only other issue I have with Messmer basically only pertains to very low health or no hit fights, and it's with his Tangle of Snakes attack in phase 2, specifically the startup for this attack that leaves a massive hitbox of the ground that you have to react to very quickly to avoid. This does such a tiny amount of damage that you can easily tank it at level 1, so it's essentially only an issue if you're going for a no-hit kill. But as someone who does like to do that, I can tell you firsthand that this is by far the scariest attack he has in phase 2. Overall, I'd definitely say that this boss is improved at level 1. He's probably the boss I enjoyed learning the most in the DLC, since as previously mentioned, it always felt like I was making progress towards understanding his moveset. And even when I wasn't close to beating him, I could still scrap my way through a bit of his health bar by just leaning on pure instinct and experience. It probably also helps that Messmer was one of the easier bosses to face tank and blast through on a normal playthrough, as he doesn't have all that much health, meaning that for the most part I didn't have to learn his moveset. Also, if you want to get to Messmer quickly and you already fought Gaius, you can do this little skip from the rafters above the Shadowkeep Loft Grace. This avoids running all the way around and pulling the lever, and is really easy to do, especially if you have a good ranged damage option to take out this bat. At this point in the playthrough, I truly have no idea what the majority of people did next, but it seems way too soon to head over to Romina and Enir Illim, so I'm going to clear up the optional bosses instead. First up is Putrescent Knight. A lot of people really hate running down here, which I kind of understand. There are a few annoying enemies, but what I see most of the hate directed at are these ball pillars that fire lasers, and I actually kind of like these. I think their rhythmic firing makes for an interesting challenge, as you have to traverse the area while dodging on beat. It's kind of like Hi-Fi Rush or one of those other games that do a similar thing like BPM or Crypto the Necrodancer. And while this sort of falls apart in this area where you're often shot at by two pillars at once that don't sync up, I think it was an admirable attempt at trying something new with their level design. And actually a very similar thing can be said about Putrescent Knight's opening attack. This attack has the knight and his horse split up and alternate charging at you, and for the most part it's just an okay attack. But for me, I think it demonstrates an interesting new idea for a very different style of boss. Souls games have this issue with duo bosses. From Software seem to really want to include them in their games, but they're very often unfair to fight as they generate a lot of frame traps, so they're unfortunately largely incompatible with the combat mechanics. This forces FromSoft to pursue workarounds, some of which have been more successful than others, but I think there's a sinister third option that's found in this opening attack from Putrescent Knight of all places. I'd like to see FromSoft try making a duo boss with one combined moveset, where you're essentially fighting one enemy moveset that's split between two entities. This would eliminate the frame trap problem while retaining the power fantasy and challenge of keeping track of and overcoming multiple foes at the same time. It's possible this wouldn't work out nearly as well as I'm imagining, but at the very least it'll be an improvement on the most recent duo boss design of chuck two enemies in the room and make one of them ignore you. Anyway, back to Putrescent Knight. Aside from my tangent about that one attack, I don't have a whole lot to say about this boss. He has a couple of okay close range combos and makes a valiant attempt to utilize jumping as a way to dodge, which I really appreciate, but overall he fails to actually do anything special or even excel at the fundamentals. And on top of that, I have a lot of small gripes with this boss that make him honestly kind of annoying to fight. The first of which is his Scream attack, which functions in a very similar way to Horrorloo's, as in it's just a get off me time waster move that has an overall negative impact on the fight, as you have to be constantly vigilant of it and adjust your playstyle to be more passive as a result of it. This doesn't quite have as much of an impact on the fight as it does with Horrorloo, since it isn't coupled with a massive unpunishable AoE, but unlike Horrorloo, Putrescent Knight already has a tendency to stall by running around the room or spamming his incredibly long phase transition attack. He also has a number of attacks that seem like good ideas but fall apart in their execution for one reason or another. The best example being this attack where he spits out fire in a circle that closes in around him. This should give the player a massive punish window and an opportunity to jump over the fire circle while doing a jump attack by timing it just right, consolidating a punish and a dodge into one satisfying package, but it doesn't really work. Sometimes you'll get this off, but it's incredibly inconsistent because the hitboxes on this attack are a mess, being unnecessarily large, behaving seemingly randomly, and interacting with the terrain in unpredictable ways, which is very disappointing. Fortunately, this boss is so incredibly weak to holy damage that our level 1 damage with no blessing looks like this. So the fight is over pretty fast regardless. I don't hate this boss, I just don't think it's particularly good, and I definitely wouldn't say it's improved by being at level 1, where you're forced to respect the fuck-ass Horaloo scream. Before we make it to our next boss, we have to take on this stupid guy, with the least creative name of all time. I don't have anything major to say about him, apart from that I guess he's one of the less offensive NPC bosses they've made. Unlike many of the others, it does feel like you can sort of learn this guy's moveset and figure out some openings, but at the end of the day, he's still an NPC boss and a required NPC boss to beat all the major bosses in the DLC. So, you know, not great. Also, if you want to avoid fighting the Invader Dragon Man at the start of the dungeon, you can take the top path above the entrance and drop down here. This doesn't trigger him to invade, so you only have to fight him once. If I had to guess, I'd say Bayle is probably the most popular boss in the DLC. People love him because of his incredible presentation and because of this guy. But what impresses me the most about this boss is how well it balances spectacle and gameplay. Unlike similar bosses like Placidusax, Fortisax, and Estelle, which have all the striking visuals but weak mechanics, Bayle manages to have both. And I think much of that comes from accepting that there may be some dissonance between what the player is seeing and how they're engaging with it. It seems like From have accepted that just because an attack looks threatening and devastating doesn't mean it has to work that way mechanically, especially if it's to the detriment of the fight. This is how we get attacks like the ground exploding that you can jump, and the massive laser beam which you can roll. Before Bayle, it felt like From would not allow such simple solutions to these attacks because of how much dissonance it creates, but this would often make the gameplay side of the fight considerably worse. With Bayle, it feels like they finally reassessed that idea, and came to the conclusion that the dissonance simply doesn't matter in comparison to making a fight that is satisfying both mechanically and aesthetically. I'm really glad that they've come around on this, as it created a fantastic boss that I can praise for its incredible visuals without qualifying every statement with "the fight kinda sucks though." And I think there's a certain charm to the insanity of dodging these huge world-ending attacks with a simple well-timed roll or jump. The ground exploding attack in particular is one of the most satisfying dodges in the game, and a lot of that is owed to the fact that you're seemingly effortlessly avoiding an insane explosion. It just feels really fucking cool. They generally did a really good job with the rest of his moveset too, taking a page out of Metyr's book, which until Bayle was probably their best dragon boss, by making him very agile and designing a moveset that's meant to be dodged from the front. This has a very similar effect that it did with Metyr, giving the fight a better back and forth and making it generally feel more similar to a swordsman boss than a beast-like boss, although I think Bayle's moveset far surpasses Metyr in variety and complexity. He's also one, if not the only boss in the DLC where you can use a different weapon at level 1. Bayle is really weak to pierce damage, so you can swap to the pickaxe over the balls and it performs very similarly while being a bit easier to use since it's so much longer. You can even grease up your pick and balls with the new dragon wound grease for some extra damage if you don't want to use cold infusion for whatever reason. Endless Bayle glazing aside, I do have one major issue with this boss. Sometimes his fire projectiles deflect off the ground. If you're far enough away when he does his fire breath attack, one single projectile can deflect off the floor and catch you, essentially making it undodgeable. This has a surprisingly significant impact on the fight. First of all, it means that he can hit you instantly upon passing through the fog wall. You start really far away from him, so if he does his fire breath first thing and it happens to deflect, you're 100% getting hit. And at level 1 this one-shots you, so you're just dead. Secondly, it prevents you from properly punishing his big combo attack. This is an attack that he likes to do a lot, and 90% of the time he follows it up by jumping away and breathing fire. If fire deflections weren't a thing, this combo would be a free charge heavy with every weapon in the game by rolling under him and hitting him in his broken leg. But if you try this, you'll be left very far away from Bayle when he does his fire breath, putting you in danger of getting slapped by a deflecting hitbox. You can still sort of do this by hitting the front of the leg instead, head and rolling the final hit of the big combo, putting you a lot closer to Bayle when he jumps away, but this still makes the punish window a lot smaller, which is fine for fast weapons like Starfist, but really sucks for bigger weapons as it removes one of their only openings for a full charge heavy. And this is on top of the fight already being significantly easier with Light Roll because of how tight the timing is on his laser attack in phase 2. These two things together make Bayle pretty hostile to slower, heavy hitting builds that like to mid-roll, which restricts what you can actually use safely against the boss. Having some builds being better than others against a boss is nothing new, and I think actually showcases how well designed all the weapons and spells are.
Holy shit.
But it's not nearly as interesting when something that really should work is neutered by a bullshit, unfair, and likely unintended mechanic like deflecting fire hitboxes. See, this is what I meant by it has a surprisingly significant impact on the fight. My only other criticism of Bayle is that he likes to do a little stalling occasionally. His right swipe into headbutt into downwards fire breath is probably the worst offender. At the very least, you can bring throwing knives to keep up poise damage while he does this. The same can't be said for his scream attack though, which not only prevents you from hitting him for a good few seconds, but also blocks a ton of your screen, making it super hard to see anything that's going on. In spite of these problems though, I think the fight largely works really well, and when you're playing within the constraints of what is safe to use against Bayle, which is admittedly still most of the stuff in the game, it really delivers on the fantasy of fighting a world-ending mythical beast, and is essentially the only boss in the series that manages to do that without struggling to hold it together mechanically. So for the first time since Metyr, I can say that a boss of this style is actually better at level 1. To get to our next boss, we have to go through one of the absolute worst fights in the whole game, Jori the Elder Inquisitor. If Bayle felt like a massive mature step forward in From's boss design philosophy, Jori feels like a regressive step backwards into the days of Dark Souls 2, where throwing a bunch of enemies in a room was considered a suitable boss fight. This fight is complete and utter unbalanced garbage that flies in the face of the challenging but fair nature of the Souls series, which drives the player to persevere despite having the odds stacked against them. There seems to be almost no consideration for the fact that spamming the player with 8 separate enemies and volleys of fast projectiles creates a huge number of situations where they cannot avoid being hit. As such, this is the perfect example of a boss that completely buckles under the pressure of a level 1 run. It is immediately obvious how unfair this fight is when one mistake means death, which is incredibly frustrating. No! The only way to really deal with this fight at level 1 is to cheese it with this backstab loop. If you can rotate around at just the right timing, you can repeatedly backstab him, preventing him from ever teleporting away and summoning his goons. This can be very finicky, so if you're doing this run yourself, you probably want a very solid crit damage setup with a dagger like the Misericord, the Blade of Mercy talisman from the start of the DLC, and the dagger talisman from Volcano Manor. Also, a helpful tip is that if you cancel his teleport, he won't attempt to do it again immediately, so you can be more lenient with the timing every other backstab. No! Oh my god, I cancelled it. Oh my god, that was so lucky. Oh my god, that was so incredibly lucky. Holy fuck. That was so incredibly lucky. With Jori dead, we enter the Abyssal Woods. Generally in these videos I tend to glaze over the areas since they don't change all that much when you're at level 1, but I want to make an exception to talk about the Abyssal Woods because they tried something different here. The Abyssal Woods was a pretty major fumble. It had a really great introduction with the messages left on the floor and Torrent being scared off, but all that tension was shattered when you see what you're supposed to be scared of. The aging untouchables are definitely a dangerous enemy, but they aren't nearly foreboding enough to live up to whatever you had pictured in your head up until that point. And on top of that, they aren't even a massive part of the area. Most of the Abyssal Woods is just huge expanses of empty space. It doesn't have the density of little secrets and surprises that you find literally everywhere else in the game, which makes the whole thing feel kind of rushed. For me, the initial spook and novelty of the horror spin on things was enough to keep me engaged on a first playthrough, but on subsequent runs, this area became a real slog, especially since you have to run the whole thing on foot. I still really appreciate that they tried something new here though, but as it is now, the Abyssal Woods really stands out to me as a very weak area, especially compared to the otherwise strong offering in the DLC. With the Abyssal Woods now behind us, we can finally fight our next major boss, Midra. Up until recently, I wasn't particularly impressed by Midra. I thought he had some okay combos and a couple of unique attacks, but nothing super interesting. And then I actually learned how to fight him. This boss is staggeringly good. He has an unbelievable capacity for optimization, heavily rewards understanding of his combo strings, quick recognition of his animations, very precise positioning, dodging and timing, and basically everything he does can be strafed in a way that is both very intuitive but still extremely difficult. This fight is very satisfying and has enormous depth, but I hadn't realized that. Somehow across numerous playthroughs, many of which were low level or even without weapon upgrades, I had managed to miss quite how good this boss really was. This is a result of a couple of major issues coming together, the first of which is his poise. For some reason, Midra only has a measly 80 poise, which is the lowest that a major boss has in the DLC. This isn't necessarily an issue on its own, but becomes really significant when combined with his second problem. His openings are too large, too frequent, and too easy to access. By just dodging his attacks in a very obvious way, you're handed these massive punish windows, and because he only has 80 poise, it just feeds you a constant stream of staggers. This makes the fight so easy that it never felt necessary to try and learn the boss properly and engage with the depth of his moveset. Why complicate things when he's already on the floor every few seconds? This to me seems like an example of where that Messmer style boss I talked about earlier fails. The attempt to ease the player into the learning process by making basic combos simple to understand, dodge, and punish was taken too far with Midra. The reward for engaging with the boss on only this surface level is too great, and as a result it prevents the player from wanting to dig any deeper. This is a massive shame, as I imagine the majority of the player base was probably just like me and has no idea how good this boss really is. Even when you do start engaging with the fight on a deeper level though, his poise and punish window problem continue to be an issue, just in a slightly different way. When you start strafing his moves and understanding just how much you can really punish, shit gets completely ridiculous. Take this attack for example. How many Starfist charge heavies do you think you could get off here? Maybe one, right? After the final swing. Nope. Midra's like, go ahead and give him 2 charge heavies for that one. A fair reward for timing a single back roll. What about this attack, his big combo? Lots of fast swings, but there's end lag at the end, so maybe 2 charge heavies. 4. This is 4 charge heavies with the Starfist. That is unheard of. I can't think of any boss in the game that gives you 4 charge heavies off a single attack, let alone one that has 80 poise. This problem is obviously at its most absurd with the Starfist that are known for outputting insane poise very fast, but anything that does okay-ish poise damage can still stagger him constantly, especially since he gives you a free charge heavy as he's getting up from a stagger as a head start. Even when you're fighting Midra with your literal bare fists, which deal the lowest poise damage in the game, you can still stagger him faster than some actual weapons do on other bosses. And while getting staggers is fun and all, it gets to the point where you feel like you're seeing a riposte animation more than actually fighting the boss. Predictably, these issues are still very present at level 1, especially considering you're most likely using the Starfist for him. The fact that I recorded 4 level 1 playthroughs for this video and still didn't feel the need to learn basically anything about Midra demonstrates just how significant the problem is. If I was rating these bosses purely on moveset, he would be right up there with Messmer, but unfortunately the reality of it is a lot more disappointing, so sadly Midra is going in the no improvement tier. This is the very lowest point of the DLC for me. Metyr is by far the worst boss in this expansion and constantly has me asking what were they thinking when fighting her. The fight opens up with some sort of okay head slam and arm swipe combos in phase 1 and a stomach hitbox that takes more damage and poise damage to incentivize the player to fight her from the front. That is all the good things I have to say about this boss. I just wanted to get them out of the way. Now here is everything I hate about this boss. There is a hitbox below her when she does a jumping head slam that is always active. If you end up on her side, she can do a crawling finger attack that is undodgeable at close range. In phase 2, she can summon fingers which can frame trap you and body block you. This flying spin attack is incredibly unforgiving to dodge at close range since the hitbox is enormous. And by far the worst offender is her huge laser beam attack, which is just straight up undodgeable. The only way to avoid this is to get to the other side of the arena and barely outspace it. What were they thinking? How does the conversation go where this move is pitched with no intended way to dodge it? How does that make it into the game without somebody mentioning that it conflicts with the challenging but fair philosophy that creates those cathartic moments of triumph that's supposed to be the whole purpose of the game? Either way, this obviously destroys the fight at level 1, as the only way to survive past the laser is to run to the other side of the arena, wait for her spin attack, get 2 hits in, run to the other side of the arena, etc, etc. It's an unbearable slog. This is a misstep so bad that it makes me question FromSoft's competence, which is insane because this DLC also has Messmer. If you're going to do this run, do not fight this boss. The whole half bug, half woman thing is something they really can't get over, isn't it? Romina is our next boss, and unfortunately I don't feel super great about her either. It's not nearly as bad as it was with Metyr, but Romina has her fair share of problems, a lot of which heavily impact the process of learning her for the first time, something that can make or break the level 1 experience. The first major issue that she has, which is something that almost everyone regardless of level probably noticed, is her sort of iffy hitboxes. I can't exactly call them bad as they are accurate to her model, but on certain attacks like her centipede head swipes and slow spin, parts of the hitbox that are active don't feel like they should be. This is something that I barely notice now after having fought her a lot, but was really jarring when I was first learning the boss, as this hardly moving bit of centipede being just as dangerous as the head felt very unintuitive, and made the learning process considerably more frustrating as I was being punished for dodging with seemingly correct timing. On top of this, since there's no clear telegraphing for this hitbox in the attack animation, and you obviously don't have hitbox view when playing the game normally, you're forced to trial and error your way into figuring out exactly when this hitbox is active, which is a nightmare when every error one-shots you. Romina has a much bigger problem though, which becomes 10 times more frustrating when you're at level 1. Her phase transition attack just has no telegraphing. If you're close to her, which you have to be to hit her, and she does this attack, you are going to get hit and you're going to die, and there's nothing you can do about it. This means when she gets close to half health, you just have to run away. Fun stuff. At the very least in phase 2, she's unable to use this move when you're right on top of her, so you can avoid it. But of course, to figure that one out, you have to once again use trial and error, as it's completely inconsistent with how it worked in phase 1. I think I put it quite well in a scrap video I wrote shortly after the release of the DLC when I said, the combination of a slightly awkwardly telegraphed moveset and downright terrible hitboxes make for a confusing and painful learning experience and an overall unsatisfying fight. Since I wrote that though, I have softened on Romina quite a bit, as once you've pushed past the initial discomfort, the fight is surprisingly fun. She has some really satisfying attacks in her moveset, like the slow spin where you can dodge both centipede ends at the same time and end up just in the right spot for a massive punish, and even those centipede head attacks with the weird hitboxes can be jumped for big headshot damage. Overall though, I would definitely say this fight is worse at level 1, since the learning process, which was already painful, is now done with zero margin for error, making her rough edges that much more frustrating to deal with. And even though the fight is eventually fun, it isn't even close to being worth the pain of learning her at level 1. Also, on the way to Romina, when passing through the Ra ruins, you can skip a considerable amount of running by activating this spirit spring using one of the shackles. The shackles have a massive hitbox, so they can topple this little pile of rocks from all the way down here. With Romina dead, we can finally use Messmer's kindling, which we picked up 6 months ago. Oh god. Ow. 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 Fuck. Ow. I don't like this place so much. It's really pretty, but then they hit us with Scorop the first staircase and the roof of 1 million deathbirds. You can at least deal with this staircase by doubling up on stealth. Don't laugh, this gives me +3 intelligence. With a combination of Unseen Form and either Lamenter's Visage or Assassin's Gambit, throwing a Kukri to distract the Divine Warrior at the bottom of the stairs, and then jumping down to the right of the staircase before resetting your stealth buffs, distracting this Inquisitor, and finally making it to the door. But a solution existing that uses some of the most broken mechanics in the game doesn't really excuse how much of a mess this part of Illim is. Things are about to get so much worse though, because of course we couldn't possibly just fight the final boss. We have to do a mandatory NPC gank. Remember like 2 years ago when I made a video just like this one for the base game and said this?
Look, I swear to God, if we see another fucking NPC boss in the DLC, it's just, why? Why would you do that to us? Why would you do that?
He's actually evil. I will concede that this fight is a cool narrative moment, but obviously I couldn't care less about that during a level 1 run. This fight is hellish without some strategy at level 1, so I have a few for you. The first of which is what I ended up going with, as it seemed the most straightforward. Basically, it's just a Frost-infused Vulgar Militia Saw, the multi-hit Physic Tier, Golden Vow, and Flame Grommy Strength. With this setup, you wait for Dane to do his buff, and stunlock him to death with the Ash of War Spinning Strikes. And then when Leda comes in, you team up on her with Natan. It's a summon, I know, and I do not care even slightly. Fuck this boss. There are some other good strats if you want to use them, like crouch stab spamming with a Colossal Sword, and even a no-hit strat where you enter the fight with stealth and kill Dane with hefty rot pots, but that's a ton of effort and largely unnecessary running around. Also, if you made it to this point and fucked up the questline so you have more enemies than just Leda and Dane, ooh. Here we are, probably one of the most controversial bosses they have ever made. Promised Consort Radahn. When I was first writing this script all the way back at the release of the DLC, I was fully expecting to absolutely tear this boss to shreds when I finally got to talk about him. But many hours of practice, one very significant patch, and 279 days later, I don't have the same hate for this boss that I once did. It seems wrong to start talking about Radahn without first addressing the elephant in the room, so let's talk about that patch. As I'm sure you all remember, at the launch of the DLC, Radahn was a little different. Along with a series of other things that were changed, his cross-slash was an unreactable frame trap. That means unlike the other frame traps we've discussed so far, like Messmer's for example, it was not possible to dodge this attack on reaction. Essentially, it was undodgeable. This has a surprisingly significant impact on the fight. Not just significant even, it completely changed it in every way. Without the use of tools like parrying or backstep iframes, to avoid his cross-slash you had to stay behind Radahn's right leg at all times. This largely prevented him from using the cross-slash, and when he did, the first swipe would go over your head, giving you enough time to dodge the second and third. Great. But since the fight clearly was not designed with this in mind, after pretty much every single dodge, you had to sprint around into the safe spot, eating into your punish window. And positioning in this safe spot was pretty precise. It wasn't uncommon to think you were in the right spot, but be very slightly off and take a cross-slash to the head. So frequently you'd do a smaller punish, or even give it up entirely to adjust your positioning instead. This also meant when dodging his close range moveset, you'd just roll left over and over and over and over again, because it was the only way you were getting to that safe spot in time. And anytime you weren't directly on top of Radahn, you had to wait for him to approach, as attempting to walk up yourself put you at risk of getting cross-slashed. Practically, this meant you got very few hits in, even with the fastest weapons. Staggers were completely off the table, and for the majority of weapons in the game, the only attacks you could really use were single light attacks or tap heavy attacks. On top of this, playing around his cross-slash enormously magnified the effect of all of Radahn's other problems. Like his grab attack that ignores iframes, you have to get far away from it to dodge it, which puts you further from his safe spot. His janky stomp hitbox that wants you to roll directly into his leg when you want to roll around to his back. The flashbang light show and blinding hair that made it incredibly difficult to see, especially when you were behind him. His rock sling attack that you can't dodge at close range, so you have to ensure Radahn isn't near a wall. So anytime he is near a wall, you have to reposition him, which means giving up one of your few punish windows to run away. His backstep and sidestep clones interacting weirdly with uneven terrain, meaning you have to once again reposition him. The incredible amount of lag generated by certain attacks that he does, making it difficult to roll at the right angle to end up in the safe spot. And this isn't even close to everything, but I've already been going on for too long. Almost all of the problems I just listed are still in the fight to some degree, but that cross-slash was so significant and took up so much of your focus and attention to deal with that all of the other little things you had to consider were way more annoying and problematic than they are now. And because a lot of these issues stall you out and prevent you from hitting the boss, it dragged the fight out to be even longer, to the point where it was completely ridiculous. This successful level 1 no blessing kill I did on old Radahn was 12 minutes long. This is Frostbleed plus 25 Starfists. These things were killing other bosses in less than 90 seconds. 12 minutes is longer than it takes to kill most of the bosses in the DLC with no weapon upgrades at all. This fight was tedious, exhausting, and above all, just not fun. It was 12 minutes of focusing on every tiny detail to avoid janky bullshit, where your reward for manipulating this buffoon into finally standing in the right spot and doing attacks that you could punish was a minuscule hit every few seconds. It was draining, it was painful, it was terrible, and all of this is from making a single swing 10 frames too fast. Clearly, FromSoft agreed, as they did something they pretty much never do and patched the boss. In 1.14, they added in those 10 frames, as well as increasing the end lag on a number of his attacks, dimming the lights on his phase 2 attacks, making Miquella's hair less opaque, and adjusting his backstep clone attack to be more forgiving. There's a great video breaking down all of the changes and providing exact frame data for them by Big Bart, which I'll link in the description. This quite modest list of changes managed to address the majority of the problems with the fight. Radahn now has very frequent openings that vary in size, allowing for the use of a much wider range of weapons, builds, and attacks. You can actually see what's going on, which is pretty cool, and one of his jankiest attacks in backstep clones was toned down enough to be reasonable. This obviously sped up the fight enormously as well, which I can fortunately demonstrate with this level 1 no upgrades kill I did literally on the day Radahn was patched in only 14 minutes, just 2 minutes longer than the kill with upgrades that I did on old Radahn. This also makes the boss actually fun to fight. The core of the moveset was never really really all that bad, you just didn't get the chance to experience it because you had to reposition behind him constantly. There's a pretty good back and forth here, and some of these attacks really leverage his truly phenomenal presentation to create super satisfying dodges. With that all being said though, I still don't feel super positive about Radahn. While he does have a pretty good combo here and there, most of what he does is just okay, passable. And then on top of that, he's still retained a lot of those problems and jank from before the patch that were unrelated to the cross slash, like the attacks that lag your game super hard, some of the visual clutter, his Metyr attack being undodgeable at close range, forcing you to reposition him when he gets near a wall, and I think most significantly, you still sort of want to left roll everything. It's the beams of light he produces on his sword swings in phase 2 that are the culprit here, since they pretty much force you to roll left on every attack. This is obviously a massive missed opportunity to take this extra positional challenge created by the light beams and use it to make the player mix up how they're responding to each combo, rewarding greater understanding of his moveset and recognition of animations. But instead, what we get is 60 sword swings, all of which are slightly different timings of roll left. Much of this fight follows a similar pattern. He has a lot of attacks, but they're all pretty simple. He isn't full of conditional follow-ups allowing for massive optimization. What you see is what you get, and what you're seeing is a B+ swordsman boss with the budget of Gale. You can probably guess what I have to say about this boss at level 1. Pre-patch, absolute dogshit, deeply painful, likely not even doable unless you're hardcore sicko into this game and play it way too much like me. Post-patch, not so bad. There's the occasional attack that can be a little too cryptic, and you'll likely die to at least one bug during your attempts, but for the most part he's fine and is kind of fun to learn for the first time. So shockingly, Radahn is not going in one of the lowest tiers. But I think overall what I have to say about Radahn is a positive. It demonstrates that FromSoft still definitely cares about maintaining the fairness of their game, and if things go too far, they are willing to make that change, even if they fucked it up the first time. That is the whole of the Elden Ring DLC, and probably all the Elden Ring we will ever get. I truly love this game, it is my favorite piece of art, and I hope I did it some justice with this video. If you made it all the way to this point, thank you so much for watching the video all the way through. I put just as much effort into minute 1 as I did minute 48, so I'm glad someone got to see it. This video was an incredible amount of work, it took an insanely long time, practicing bosses, recording several runs, taking notes, rewriting the script multiple times, doing all the free cam stuff, and of course editing it. For a long time this project was something that haunted me. I always wanted to do it, and I knew I wanted to really try my hardest with it, and I was always working on it, but I could never get it quite right. So to sit here with it finally finished is unbelievable, really. I think if there was ever a test to see if I was really committed to making videos, this was it, and I can say for sure that I genuinely love making videos, even if this video gets 10 views. I enjoyed this process enormously, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.